Welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Also in the studio, the man who makes this show happen, our producer, Thomas Dye. We're pleased this morning to welcome Curtis Griffith as our guest. Curtis is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of South Plains Financial. He began his career in Cochran County at First State Bank of Morton back in 1972. He served as Chairman and CEO of South Plains Financial and its predecessor institutions since 1993. In addition to his banking interests, Curtis owns and operates several agriculture-related businesses. He's a member of the State Bar of Texas, the National Cotton Council, the Plains Cotton Growers, and the Texas Cotton Ginners Association. Curtis maintains leadership roles in the Independent Bankers Association of Texas and has been actively involved in the Lubbock community for decades. Curtis, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Gordon, thank you for the invitation. I think this is a great idea, and I hope that it still feels like a great idea after you're done interviewing me, but let's go and give it a try.
No doubt about that. I'm a firm believer that in order to know the history, to understand an institution, you have to know its history and you have to know how it started. And your family and South Plains Financial have a genesis over in Cochran County. Tell our listeners how the Griffith family got to Cochran County and give us a little bit of perspective on what that looked like early 20th century.
Well, there's not a real short answer to that inquiry, but I'll do my best. The Griffith family, my grandparents, were living in southwestern Oklahoma at the turn of the century, 1900s. And eventually, they had a total of 12 children. 11 survived into adulthood. My father was the third oldest. He was born in 1909. The family story was that they had been across the Red River visiting some families on the other side, and that Dad was born on the trip back. And he always argued he was born on the Texas side, but his mother said, "No, we'd actually crossed the river, son. You were born in Oklahoma." His mother had some health issues, and doctors who didn't know what else to do recommended the family move to some drier climates, and they did that. They headed west, came through Lubbock, probably about 1912. Dad has a very early childhood memory of laying under a quilt in the hot sun in the Lubbock wagon yard about that point. So Lubbock was a pretty primitive place about that time. They headed on through because Granddad had bought a small ranch near House, New Mexico. That's up northwest of Clovis. They were staying there until the blizzard of 1918 came through. That killed all the cows and, well, all livestock of any kind in that area at that time. The story I was told, they pretty much burnt the house for firewood down to one room, but the snow finally stopped and began to melt. And my father, who was born in early February, would always tell that he spent his 10th birthday skinning carcasses to get hides and get enough money. They could buy a team and a wagon, and they left out for Phoenix, Arizona at that point. Oddly, Dad never had much use for cattle or ranching after that, and so he kind of stuck to farming from that point forward. They stayed in Phoenix for about a year, then couldn't stand it, headed back. Granddad always wanted to have some land, apparently somewhere. Bought a little spot near Roaring Springs, lived there for a couple of years, then headed out and bought 80 acres of mostly sand out west of Wellman. That's down southwest of Brownfield, and kind of raised the rest of the family there. Dad hadn't had much opportunity for schooling, but he did actually finish the 8th grade while he was there in Wellman, and that served him well in the rest of his days. As a person with very little formal education, he was still a very astute businessman. In Cochran County was actually formed, technically, I believe 1876, but nobody was living there, coyotes and jackrabbits and the occasional Comanche, but it was organized as a county in 1924. The family moved up there around the early 1930s, but Dad was expanding farming, and he stayed there in Terry County, where he had by that time married my mom in 1934. But they had an opportunity to rent some land in northwestern Cochran County in 1941. They eventually moved up there in 1945. Bought his first cotton gin from Spike Dyke's parents, actually, in 1945, and with Dad's usual amazing timing, went 2 years and didn't gin a bale of cotton because it just didn't rain in western Cochran County. But in the Depression, they'd struggled through it, but Dad could kind of see that things would improve at some point. He'd built a small grain elevator in Wellman, stored some grain that he'd purchased, and profited pretty handsomely on it as prices improved at that point. He had used that to acquire more farmland and was doing pretty well, all things considered. And after they moved up there in 45 and got the gin, continued to expand and worked in things up there. And the rest of the story, I guess, they were building an addition onto the cotton gin, and Dad was climbing up a ladder that broke. He fell. That was in late 1951 and shattered an ankle. And oddly enough, in October of 1952, I showed up, and the family joke was that my mother had finally got him still long enough, so I am an only child, and that's kind of the history of how I got here.
So when your family moved to Cochran County, did they move to Morton? Or you had mentioned there was actually a community called Griffith, Texas?
It was very small, but yeah, they decided to kind of rename it. It had started as Oasis. Back in the 1920s, as this entire area began to be changed from being just ranching into farming, town builders showed up, and one gentleman, and I do not know his name, laid out a township out there where Mom and Dad had kind of settled and where his parents were living at the time as well. And it was called Oasis. He never got anywhere with it, but the Dykes had built a cotton gin there. Dad built a grain elevator across the road. It had a small general store there and a few families that lived in the immediate area. And at some point, it was actually renamed Griffith. And that sign's now gone, and as the people are pretty well gone, and the gin and the elevator are gone now too. But just a wide spot in the road these days. Mm-hmm.
So Spike would have been a little bit older than you were. Did you know the family as a child? Or?
No, I didn't. They left immediately after selling that and moved down. I believe bought a gin in Ballinger, I think. And Spike finished growing up down there. He did tell me while he was here at Tech that he took a trip out that way one time and looked around and said, you know, that house looked a lot smaller today than I ever remember it being when I was a little kid. But he did have his early years right there.
When your family is in Cochran County, how many people in the county? What describe the population and the character of the individuals there?
It began to change in the 20s, as much of this area did. I believe the estimate was in 1920 that there were probably barely 100 people there, and they were pretty much all cowboys who worked for the C.C. Slaughter operation. C.C. Slaughter had acquired hundreds of thousands of acres of land in the western part of the South Plains, had quite the cattle empire out there, and the family still owns significant tracts of land in Cochran County even today. But that was about all that was there. When the town builders came in, and a gentleman named Morton J. Smith was actually the one that started the town of Morton, and they made all kinds of promises to people to get them out here. There was a boom in agriculture at the time. The remnants of what happened in World War I, of course, that had pretty much destroyed much of Europe, and there was huge demand for American farm products, drove prices up substantially. Do you want to back up on that one?
Yeah, sorry about that. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please email us at info@classical1057.org. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. Today we're privileged to be speaking with Curtis Griffith. In our last segment, we talked a little bit about how his family pioneered their way into Cochran County. We're going to talk more about that right now. Curtis, you mentioned the Slaughter Ranch, and this area in the 20s and 30s was known as a ranching area. Tell us about the shift from ranching to agriculture in West Texas.
Yes, it was. This entire region was largely one large cattle pasture for quite a lot of its early history. Ranches, big ranches began to break up after the entry into the 20th century, and especially by the 1920s, that accelerated. The demand for U.S. ag products really spiked up after World War I. Europe was desperate for food of all sorts and all commodities. And this was some prime area up here. There was less rainfall than off in other parts of the state, but key for cotton is there was missing one important pest. The boll weevil had moved in eastern and central Texas and was really decimating cotton crops down there. So cotton farmers began to migrate up here in the South Plains region because they could raise cotton crops without the fear of the boll weevil.
Was that mainly because of the altitude?
Altitude and colder winters, the composite of those things too. And for many, many years, we didn't have to fight boll weevil. Eventually we did, and then went through a boll weevil eradication program, and it's been very successful. But Cochran County still is over half in pretty much rangeland. The south part of the county has some farming, but there's a lot of it still in native pasture even after these years, and quite a fair chunk of that is still held by the slaughter heirs.
Let's talk about growing up in Morton. Tell us about your education experiences, your family experiences. What's it like being a kid in Morton, Texas in the 1950s?
I actually, to tell you a little on education, I've got to back up a little and say a little bit about Mom. She actually had grown up family moved from East Texas, located in Littlefield. She graduated school there, went up to attend what was then West Texas State Teachers College, stayed long enough to get a teaching certificate, and then she moved down to Terry County and was teaching down there in a couple of schools that aren't there anymore. She met Dad at a Sunday school one day, and they kind of hit it off and married in 1934, right there in kind of the depths of the Depression. But even so, even in those hard economic times, Dad was an old believer that married woman shouldn't work outside the home. So she had to quit teaching, and she loved teaching. But she did what she needed to do and worked with him, and they made a great partnership for all the rest of their lives, with him doing a lot of the hard work farming and other things, and she was there to keep the home and keep the books, and was the bookkeeper through a whole lot of this, including at the cotton gin, all of that. So what I tell people, since I didn't show up for 18 more years after that, because they were both 41 when I was born, kind of amazing I got here at all, but she'd saved up for 18 years and then dumped the whole load on me. So I was reading by the time I was 3, and she really got me prepped. I'm one of a whole batch of cousins on the Griffith side especially, and all of them had started to school except me. And I didn't like that very much, so I was 5, but we checked, and Texas at that time didn't have state kindergarten, so they weren't going to let me start in Morton. So I went across the line in Causey, New Mexico, at a school that's no longer there, and started school right there, and went there until the middle of the 5th grade. And early on in the 1st grade, because the school was so small, that we had 2 grades per room at that point, and so one teacher was teaching both 1st and 2nd. And she decided, and with Mom's permission, to bump me up to 2nd grade by the time I was basically turning 6. So I kind of jumped a year right there and went on through school that way. It was a great time. The 50s were maybe not as idyllic in many ways as some people say today, but it was still pretty good. We were isolated out here. World events other than things about, doing, by the late 50s, doing some drills about a nuclear attack, go sit under your desk and don't look out the window like that was going to do a whole lot of good. But anyway, other than that fear and stuff, that there was not much that was a problem out here. Things changed a lot, of course, in the 60s. I would say that even though today, obviously, the world moves very fast and we're seeing some massive changes in a lot of things out there, the decade of the 60s, maybe just because that's, the time I was a young person. There was a lot of us baby boomers, that kind of came of age there in the 60s. It transformed our society in ways that I don't think any single decade ever has before or since. It really changed the entire American economy and society in so many ways. And Morton, though being just a small West Texas town, had some of that to deal with as well. We had a few, drug problems begin to show up, and had some boys go off to the war that didn't come back, and some came back in not very good shape. There were a lot of things that did affect us out there, but we were still a close-knit group, and our class of 1969 and the couple of classes either side still get together for reunions fairly often and just visit with each other.
So tell us how you got to Texas Tech. I mean, I see that you applied to MIT and Caltech. Give us that story.
Well, I had some, again, excellent teachers in high school. Really inspired. I had a great math teacher, a couple of really good science teachers, and so I just enjoyed that. I liked math, science, and I was pretty good at filling out pages of blue ovals with a number 2 pencil, and I did. I applied to 2 schools, Caltech and MIT. I was accepted to MIT, and at 16 years of age, I went up, and my dad went with me to Boston. In late May, early June of 1969, we toured the town and visited on campus a while. And if you can envision Boston in 1969, it was an interesting place and not very much like Morton, Texas. And so I told Dad the night before we were to go back that I just decided I wouldn't do that, and he was very relieved. My best friend was already committed to go to Lubbock Christian College, and I attended that for a year, and then transferred on to Texas Tech. And I distinctly remember telling my high school guidance counselor my junior year that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for a college education, but I knew I didn't want to go to Texas Tech, and I didn't want to major in agricultural economics. You can guess exactly what I ended up with a degree in. So anyway, but it was all in all a good experience, but especially that freshman year at LCC, then became LCU. A gentleman named Don Williams, I always have to give him credit. He caught me as we were leaving the freshman orientation and just insisted that I join the debate team. I was a mathematics major. I had no interest in doing that, but I'd had a speech class my senior year in high school, and he was in his first year teaching there, just recruiting some kids with any background in it. And in those that year of working with him and with our debate team, it really, the speech class in Morton my senior year was the start, but that really helped me finish up the fear of speaking in public. And that's something I know a lot of people struggle with, and I always credit Dr. Williams for that I overcame it there. And after that, microphones and crowds don't scare me. I don't always have anything intelligent to say, but I don't get nervous about doing it.
It's time for us to take another quick break. Curtis, when we return, we'll talk a little bit more about your interest in banking and agriculture moving forward. Today we're speaking with Curtis Griffith. I want to remind our listeners that all Archive West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand in our station app and also on our website at classical1057.org. We'll be right back. Back on Archive West Texas with Curtis Griffith. In our last segment, we talked about growing up in Morton in the 1950s. Curtis, you were a student at Tech in the 60s. You talked a little bit in the last segment about what a tumultuous time that was for the nation and even for our area. Tell us what it's like being a student at Tech in the 60s.
A friend of mine from Morton who'd been attending South Plains College, he and we got a house over on 21st Street across from campus, lived there that year. And it was, different, certainly, exciting, lots of things going on, lots of things happening in the world. The Vietnam War was still a huge issue out there. The national leadership was changing directions, and it was a good time to be at Tech, though. There was a lot of expansion and building going on at that time at the university. New buildings have been going up, and the student population was increasing a lot. The ag school was excellent, but also got some good things out in some of the other required courses, a few electives here and there. But despite the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really think I had any interest in learning that much about ag economics, I did learn a lot of stuff that was very valuable to me later, moving on and understanding more of the theory and some of the econometrics of how to really analyze things in a way that I hadn't ever learned before any other situation. Then I finished up at Tech in December of 1973. My father decided that he could do without me on the farm a little bit longer and encouraged me to go enroll in the Texas Tech School of Law, which I did, started that fall, and finished that up in May of 1977. Great school experience, some really great professors there. The best 3 years of education I probably ever had, even though I never practiced law. I did take the bar, passed it, and I stayed current with CLE credits and things for many years. Always have had an interest in taxation and in estate planning law, and didn't really care anything much about courtroom law, but it has served me pretty well in business through all these years as well.
That's understandable. The law school was fairly new at that time, wasn't it?
It was. I was one of the, I may be wrong, I think our class may have been the second class to start in what is now the current law school building. The law school began literally in some barracks that had moved in as temporary buildings, and that first couple of classes were pretty amazing that they went through those kind of facilities and still came out and made some very excellent lawyers. There's some fine ones across the way. I used to say that I've had probably the highest score on the LSAT going in. I was not the number one student coming out. That honor belonged to Mr. Walt Huffman, who went on to become a brigadier general and head of the Army JAG Corps in his career, and is just a real fine guy, and it was an honor to be one of the classmates. But we had a great group and made some great attorneys out of that.
So you've got degrees in agriculture and also a law degree and applied economics. Tell us how you wound up in the banking industry.
Well, Dad and 4 other guys had purchased the local bank there in Morton in 1962. The bank was founded in 1941, but by the early 60s, the full control was pretty much held by one family, and they just weren't very progressive. They didn't show a lot of initiative to try to help things go in the community. And Dad had known, he'd had good bankers. Very quick story that his banking was still being done, even though they'd moved to Morton. He was banking in Brownfield State Bank, no longer here, but a gentleman named J.O. Gillum was his officer. And Dad had had some rough crop years up there in Morton and walked in the bank and told J.O., said, I think this is it. I think I better just come back down here. Sherry and I need to move back to Terry County because I don't think this is going to work out. J.O. said, well, Carl, is that really what you want to do? And Dad said, I don't know if it's what I want to do, but I think it's what I better do. He said J.O. leaned back in the big chair and chewed on that cigar for a while, stared up the ceiling, and then he reached over in the drawer, and this is going to mean nothing to a lot of our listeners probably, but a few of the folks with my color hair, as I say, would remember when notes at a bank were essentially on a peel-off tablet, and you signed one at a time, and whatever the amount was and the terms were, it's all contained right there. And he pulled out one of those kind of little tablets of notes and tossed it across the desk at Dad and said, Carl, you go back up there at Cochran County and worry about farming and let me worry about the banking. And without that man, Dad would not have stayed in Cochran County, and this story would be very different today. So Dad knew what it was to have a good banker, and that's what they wanted in Morton. And with a gentleman named Gene Benham, D.E. Benham, kind of leading them, he'd come there as a Farmers Home Administration agent, moved in from Arkansas, eventually married a farmer's daughter there, became a successful farmer himself, and he led the bank from 1962 until really 1984 when he finally retired, and led us into some really great opportunities. He was a well-known leader of community banking across Texas, and a lot of things changed during those years as well. The bank grew. It didn't grow a lot, but it was safe, it was sound, and he left it in good shape for us. So that kind of got me interested in banking as a kid, because Dad was early chairman of the board, and then in 1972, Mr. Benham decided that I needed to be on the board of directors at age 19. His son, they had also just an only child, and his son was going off to become an economics professor in a well-known college and university. And he didn't want to live in Morton, Texas, so Mr. Benham kind of took me under his wing and encouraged me to get more involved with it. And since 1972, I've sat around a board table for the various institutions that we've been over those years.
So what's that like as a 20-year-old sitting in a board meeting talking about financial assets and loans and
Well, it was intimidating. I didn't say much for the first several months. I mostly just kept quiet and took some notes and I listened as the gentleman discussed. And remember, at those times, we're just a small country bank, so every farm loan of basically any size was handed around the board table. So I was given to understand very quickly that whatever I saw in that room stayed there, and that I wasn't going to share that outside. And of course, we've always tried to live with that, and all bankers do. But it was interesting to learn that, to see what was working and what wasn't, because as farmers got their annual loans, you're getting a pretty detailed look at their operations. So it was educational for me to see how some farmers were succeeding and some weren't doing so well. But it was definitely a learning experience. I was taking some banking classes at Tech as well, and learned that as well. Learned a little more of the Federal Reserve System and Banking 101 over here in the finance department of the Business Administration School at the time. So it broadened my horizons, even though I was still very much a farmer. Expected to be a farmer whenever I graduated from law school, and did that as a primary occupation for several years. Honestly, it was really until about 1993, and we bought Citibank, the first time I ever had an office inside the bank.
you didn't have much time to be in trouble if you're in law school and you're on a bank board and you're also taking classes or farming. I mean, kept you out of trouble, I guess.
Well, and I had a wife that was keeping me in good shape too, as well too. Sue and I married between our sophomore and junior years here at Texas Tech, and she's kept a pretty good herd on me ever since.
Everybody needs that. We're going to close out this show and come back next time with some more of Curtis's story on relating more specifically to the work at Citibank and South Plains Financial. Appreciate all of you listening today. If you know someone whose story we should share, please email your suggestions to info@classchool1057.org. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Please join us next time for part 2 of this interview with Curtis Griffith. Thank you for listening today.